You probably don't need telling that Huawei is a bit of a wacky company. So, welcome to my top 25 things you might not have known about them. Starting with the campus. Huawei has a massive campus in China for its employees, so large it's divided into 12 separate towns, and each one is based on a famous European city. In fact, there is so much space here that it takes a full 22 minutes to do one lap on the tram, because yes, the campus has its own train service. Also, within this area is a castle where the company supposedly houses its secretive research unit. As for the company itself, you might know that Huawei Technologies has two primary brands. One of them is just called Huawei, one of them Honor. But what you might not have known is why. Both Huawei and Honor benefit from the company's massive investment budget. But whilst Huawei is used to target business elites and executives, Honor is a young, energetic brand made for what they call digital natives. So that's people who've grown up with phones and the internet. Plus, and this shouldn't be overlooked, Honor, just as a word, is far easier for Westerners to pronounce, and the word itself, Honor, has some positive connotations. On to the next thing. Huawei makes a pair of smart glasses with built-in speakers for listening to music and dual microphones with noise cancellation for making calls. This is a weird one. They actually use a rotating chairman system. You've got 3 people who basically take turns to become the company's top-ranking leader for 6 months at a time. And to be fair, it is a crazy idea, but it kind of makes sense. It's done so that different leaders can bring expertise from different parts of the company. And here's one I found from personal experience. So a couple of months ago, I was talking to a Huawei executive, and he told me that he'd seen the Huawei P30 Pro's prototype phone 6 months before the phone was actually announced. And so, it may well apply to other companies as well, but it definitely looks like Huawei at least has an almost ready-to-go device well ahead of launch. I can't stress the next one enough. Huawei is incredibly important to China. It's not just the country's way of showing the entire world that they're innovating, but Huawei employs over 100,000 people in China alone. And they bring in so much money that should anything happen to Huawei, it would be enough to shake the entire country's GDP. Now, you probably know that Huawei has been involved in a fair share of controversies. They've had a pretty rocky relationship with the US, to say the least, and a big part of that stems from the founder himself, who actually served as an engineer for China's military. People are concerned that because of this, he has a strong connection to the Chinese government. Add into that mix all these reports on spying and potential security threats, and safe to say the US is on guard, but nothing's really been proven yet. It is interesting though that this founder, whilst having a stake of less than 2% in Huawei, is still one of the richest people in China. And it actually gets stranger. We're talking about a guy who publicly praises iPhones, Huawei's direct competitor. He's even told the press that he buys iPhones for his entire family. His words were, "One can't narrowly think love for Huawei should mean loving Huawei phones," almost implying that he doesn't love Huawei phones. Anyways, this distaste that the US government has for Huawei has caused a massive knock-on effect. It means that US carriers like Verizon have actually backed down from offering Huawei phones because of government pressure. And so pretty much the only way you can buy a Huawei in the US is unlocked, considering that 90% of the population there only buy their phones on contract. This leads us to the next problem. Almost nobody in the US has a Huawei phone. Whilst the company has around 35% of the Chinese smartphone market, they actually sell really well in Europe. In the US, less than 1% of people use a Huawei. It actually gets worse than that. You might have seen in the news recently that for a lot of countries, Huawei has been cut from their 5G plans. The way it works is there's actually 3 primary companies that build 5G infrastructure. You've got Huawei, you've got Ericsson, and you've got Nokia. And in places like the US and Australia, the governments have straight up stopped Huawei from being any part of it. Unfortunately, sometimes Huawei does not help themselves. This growing distrust is often made worse by their own marketing campaigns. Because it turns out it's not just the founder who buys iPhones, it is apparently half the social media team. Huawei has a famously high amount of tweets from both official accounts and the celebrities they endorse. These tweets tell everyone how great their devices are, whilst actually being tweeted from an iPhone. Add to that, earlier this year, there was a massive controversy about something called Moon Mode on the P30 Pro. This phone launched with a feature that allowed people to zoom 50 times in and still capture a sharp picture of the moon. But there was a photographer who did a whole series of tests, and he came to the conclusion that they were faking it. Huawei was supposedly using AI to detect the moon, and then, almost like Photoshop, fill in the details that weren't even there to make the photo look better. Now, this was never actually confirmed by multiple sources, and Huawei themselves denies doing it, so it may not even be true, but regardless, it didn't help the trust situation. But it's not all bad news. Huawei is very aware of all the potential bans and blocks that they're going to face in the future, and so their solution is to basically build their own version of everything. They're developing their own operating systems, their own smart assistant, and they're already one of the few companies that builds not just their own devices, but their own chips to power them. A big reason for that is that Huawei is one of the biggest investors in research and development in the world. A good amount of employees to have in research and development would be 30,000 or 40,000. Huawei has 80,000. In fact, the word Huawei altogether literally translates to Chinese achievement. According to a report by Bloomberg, Huawei's consumer products, i.e. their smartphones and their tablets, are doing so well that they've finally overtaken the revenue achieved from selling networking equipment, which used to be Huawei's main business. And here's something that captures just how large the Huawei business has become. They have their own university, complete with student housing. The idea being that you qualify through this and you can have a direct job at Huawei whilst already having a lot of the skills you're going to need. It's kind of amazing then that a company of this scale started off 30 years ago with less than $5,000 worth of capital. It now generates over $100 billion per year. And something I find quite interesting is in that time period, Huawei's actually had 3 different logos. We've got this one from when the company started in 1987, number 2 from 2006 onwards, and one final redesign last year in 2018, which basically just made it flatter and cleaner. As for what exactly it means, I've seen a couple of interesting theories. One that this is actually just Apple, but cut into pieces, but the predominant answer is that it's a flower. In Mandarin, the first part of the word Huawei roughly translates to petals, or luxurious. If you enjoyed this video, then do let me know in the comments below. It's the first time I've done a video like this in quite a long time, so maybe I'll do more of them for other companies. With that being said, my name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.